Julie Kelly joins us now. She's the author of the Declassified by Julie Kelly Substack and the book January 6th, How Democrats Used the Capitol Protest to Launch a War on Terror Against the Political Right. Julie, good to have you back with us.
Hey, Vince. Good to hear from you. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. All right, so Judge Juan Merchan, he says, I don't want to be political. I don't want people to think I'm trying to influence the election. I'll sentence Trump after the election. What do you think?
Interesting, right? Well, a couple of things here. 2 days before the sentencing, Vince, Juan Merchan was going to issue an order related to the Supreme Court's ruling in the immunity question, where, as you and I have discussed, the Supreme Court came back and established basically 3 buckets of immunity where a president would be immune from his acts in office. And this goes to the J6 case indictment, Jack Smith indictment against Donald Trump for the events of January 6th. Well, the alleged conduct for which Donald Trump was convicted in the Bragg case happened when he was in office. So he was president during this timeline of the Bragg indictment and prosecution. So this again raised more immunity questions. So Judge Merchan on September 16th, all by his lonesome, he wasn't going to confer with any experts or get even DOJ's opinion on this. He was just going to rule single-handedly as to whether there was any immunity implications in this conviction. And of course there are. Not only was Donald Trump president, they used communications with him and his communications director, Hope Hicks. There was testimony by other White House employees about Donald Trump's, activities, his schedule, his routine in office. All of that would be immune from prosecution, not just in trial, but none of this would be allowed during the investigation. So the whole case and prosecution and conviction is tainted right now. So he was going to come back on September 16th and probably say, no, the Supreme Court immunity ruling does not relate to this prosecution. This is all private, personal conduct. But what would happen then, Vince, is because it's immunity, it automatically goes to appeal, something called interlocutory appeal, which is one of these rare occasions where something can be appealed before a trial. So September 16th, he would have come back with that, and then everything would have been suspended anyway. Now he gets to look like, oh, I'm being magnanimous, I'm being cautious about the election. All of a sudden, I don't want to interfere in the presidential election. So I'm going to vacate the sentencing date, postpone it until after the election. But there were a lot more motives behind the scenes about what he did there.
Interesting. So what that means is that the state of the case was very perilous in terms of it continuing to exist.
Yeah.
And so Juan Merchan punts because, let's be honest, he is a political actor. And he wants to leave in the eyes of the public this idea that Donald Trump is some sort of criminal. He wants that to be hanging over President Trump. And what you're pointing out, Julie Kelly, is that this case could have been thrown out on its head if Juan Merchan was actually doing his job correctly.
Right. I mean, if he would have come back on September 16th, and of course this has been vacated as well, and said, yes, there are immunity implications in this conviction. We need to take a step back. We need to revisit the conviction. We need to see what elements, according to the Supreme Court, are covered by presidential immunity.
Yeah.
Redo the case from the very beginning. He wasn't going to do that, right? Because we've already seen this guy in action for over 2 years. So he wasn't going to do that. He was going to come back and say that these were personal, private acts,
yes,
not covered. But again, triggering that appeal, the whole thing would have been suspended anyway. So this is more just performance by Juan Merchan.
I mean, that adds a lot of important context. I will say my instinct on Juan Merchan and his Friday announcement is that he knows that a lot of this has backfired for his party and its cause. I think they went into this thinking they were going to diminish Trump and make it so that people thought he was toxic and they would not support him. They'd run away from him. But the reality of that trial in New York was every day when President Trump would step up to the microphone at both the beginning and the end of each day's court proceedings, he only became more popular in the eyes of the voters. People really did see that the left was out to get him, that this was a rigged system designed to crush its political opponent. And in his fight and in that very spectacular way, he's accrued more support onto himself. And my suspicion is that the left knows now, having lived through all of this, that actually throwing Donald Trump in prison, turning him into a true martyr, a political prisoner, will backfire on them in the election. How much do you think that factored into the judge's thinking?
I agree with you. I think that was part of it too. And I think there was an even bigger calculation there, and that is that House Republicans are investigating his daughter and his daughter's company, Authentic Campaigns, which of course I reported just this year. She has raked in $13 million just this year. At the same time her father's presiding over that trial, he should have recused based on his daughter's political connections and lucrative Democratic consulting business. $13 million this year. Her co-founder, Mike Nellis, is the head of White Dudes for Harris, Kamala Harris. Lauren Merchant worked for the Kamala Harris presidential campaign back in 2020. She made $8 million this year from Adam Schiff in his Senate campaign. You cannot allow this. This is why he should have recused. He didn't. He a number of times denied this motion to recuse. But now House Republicans have sent letters to Lauren Merchant asking for more information about her clients, any use of the trial or the prosecution in any of the campaigns that she's working on. So this could be a little more CYA for Juan Merchan and maybe trying to protect his daughter from further investigations.
Let me go from here to this debate tomorrow night and get your thoughts on everything. But I do see that, one of the tactics that the left has here, insofar as they can convince anybody to vote for Kamala Harris, is that she's the prosecutor and Trump is the convicted felon. That's the frame that the left has been advancing. What do you make of that? First of all, as a political strategy, it's so brazen and over the top. What do you make of that, and will we see that tomorrow night?
That's an interesting question, Vince. There are reports out today that said that she was disappointed with the mics being off, of course, muted like they were with the Biden-Trump debate in June, that she wanted the mics on, not so Trump would interrupt her, so she could interrupt him and kind of revisit her long ago role as a prosecutor. I mean, she was in the U.S. Senate since 2016. She's been vice president. She hasn't been, trial prosecutor in at least a decade or so. But they have a problem because now they're trying to make it look like Donald Trump, if he gets into office, is going to use his DOJ to retaliate against his political opponents. Of course, that's what the Biden-Harris DOJ has been doing for 4 years, including Trump and all of his supporters. So that sort of approach is going to backfire as well, because you can't look like a prosecutor, call him a convicted felon, and sort of amplify the lawfare of the Biden-Harris regime while at the same time accusing your opponent of trying to do the same thing. So I'm not so sure that is going to be her approach going in tomorrow. But, this is going to, I just posted a piece right now, a dream piece for the moderators to finally ask her some questions about January 6th, which she has not been asked any questions about, an event she compares to 9/11 and Pearl Harbor. I would love to see David Muir ask her a question or two about that.
Yeah. Wasn't she in the vicinity of the so-called pipe bombs? How come she hasn't been playing that up on the campaign trail?
Yes, that is a question Darren Beatty and I have been asking for years. Why, when she was at the DNC, when this alleged pipe bomb was discovered shortly after 1 o'clock, and we were told by the FBI a viable device, it was deadly. It was suggested this was a MAGA person, a Trump supporter who planted that device. Why has she never talked about it? First of all, why was she at the DNC? She was a sitting U.S. senator. She was involved in the proceedings of January 6th. She was the first incoming, woman of color vice president ever. Why wasn't she there? Why'd she go to the DNC? How did her Secret Service detail, Capitol Police, DC Metro Police, and bomb-sniffing canines all miss this explosive device sitting right outside? We're told now she came within 20 feet of that bomb. She's never talked about it.
Yeah.
And never been asked about it.
No, it's bizarre. I mean, and that's the kind of thing, any of these Democrat politicians, they'd be leaning on as a basis for their existence as a politician. This is a part of her story, her rise, that she was subjected possibly to a terror attack and she overcame it. she doesn't use that at all. She doesn't do that at all. And it adds to the suspicion that whole pipe bomb component was just a hoax.
That's right. And was she part of what some speculate was Plan A, that they were going to evacuate the Capitol upon discovery of these pipe bombs at the DNC and RNC just a few blocks away from the Capitol, and that, oh my God, Kamala Harris was there too. We have to shut everything down. We have to evacuate. We have to find this bomber. You know, she almost died. People around the RNC were almost blown up.
Right.
That was the original plan. But as things started to unfold, both organically and orchestrated, it looked like, you know, that plan didn't really need to come to fruition.
Sure. So what other questions would you like to see her asked in this fantasy world where David Muir takes all of your advice?
I would like her confronted. You know, on Wednesday is the 23-year anniversary of 9/11, and she has disgracefully compared January 6th to 9/11. I would love David Muir to say, please explain to the loved ones of the victims of 9/11, almost 3,000 people, how you can sit there to their face and say what happened on January 6th was as bad as what happened on 9/11. I would love for her to answer to the egregious double standard of justice by her and Joe Biden, Merrick Garland's DOJ, now closing in, Vince, on 1,500 January 6th defendants. They are arresting people every week, almost on a daily basis, as this prosecution continues nearly, 4 years later. How could she support BLM rioters but defend her DOJ continuing to round up mostly nonviolent misdemeanors for something that happened almost 4 years ago?
Also,
so those are accusing.
And if January 6th was 9/11, then what was it when rioters burned down the 3rd precinct in Minneapolis, and then you bailed them out? What was it when David Dorn was shot dead in the street? What was it when there was billions of dollars in damage, all those dozens of lives lost, and you were encouraging it? You were breathing life into that chaos. So if January 6th was 9/11, what would you call that? Because she was responsible for inflaming that disaster, that chaos.
Well, I mean, it was just a summer of love. I mean, let's not forget that's what it really was, despite what we could see before our eyes. But even bringing that in a little sharper focus, compare what happened in Washington, D.C. itself. The burning of St. John's Church, the attacks on federal police officers, Secret Service, and U.S. Park Police, destruction of monuments and federal property, the lockdown of the White House, forcing Donald Trump and his family to a secure location as rioters attempted and almost successfully breached the security fence around the White House. How is that? And all those cases have been dropped, Vince. All of those cases were dropped by the Biden-Harris Department of Justice. Not a single BLM 2020 rioter from D.C. is being prosecuted, let alone continue to be investigated. The entire event. And, of course, this went on for weeks and months in Washington. As you know, they're there. I mean, they were trying to assault lawmakers as they were leaving the White House in September of 2020. I mean, they almost knocked over Brian Mast, who is a double amputee war veteran, as they tried to surround him and his family. Rand Paul and his wife also attacked.
Yeah.
But all of that is forgotten. I would love for Kamala Harris to try to defend her involvement in protecting BLM rioters, failing to prosecute them. Well, to this day, the ongoing J6 prosecution resulting in this egregious double standard of justice and destruction of people's lives.
I know. I still remember the inaugural riots when Trump was sworn in January 2017. As they were burning that limo out in front of the Washington Post, and I was actually standing at the corner of 14th and K as the riots were going on around me. It was madness, and that was the left doing what it does best, which is destroy. It's so wild and forgotten to history. We haven't generated a national holiday to commemorate it. Thank you, Julie Kelly, as always. Great to talk to you today.